What is longevity? I mean, most people think, well, longevity is you live a long time, but you're getting older while you're living a long time, right? So every picture you see of somebody 100 or 110, 120, it's like, yeah, well, they lived a long time. But when I look at those pictures, I say to myself, gosh, that's not really what I'm going for. I don't want to look like that. I don't want to be like that, right? And so I have a different definition of longevity. It's really, for us, the target is at age 100, it's a 30-year-old body and a 300-year-old mind.
Welcome to Harmonic Alignment, a podcast that explores the new frontier of energy medicine, bridging the gap between Western medicine and quantum physics, giving you easy and practical solutions. Guided by me, Dr. Larisa Sharipova, and me, Priscilla Koblenz. Join us on a journey discovering your harmonic alignment. On today's episode of Harmonic Alignment, 100 is the new 30. We have a guest that's a true game changer. Dr. Larisa Sharipova connects with Dr. Jeffrey Gladden, a longevity functional medicine doctor who's in his 70s but has the biological age of someone in his 20s or 30s. A cardiology expert who is flipping the script on how we view health and aging, using a holistic approach that's not just functional medicine and the latest in tech, but adding in the emotional, spiritual, and the quantum. Dr. Gladden calls it playing the symphony of longevity to live young for a lifetime. We couldn't have a more exciting and aligned guest on Harmonic Alignment. You're going to want to check out his Amazon best-selling book, 100 is the New 30. Be sure to share this podcast with those you love so they can have access to the wisdom that will make 100 feel like 30.
I'm happy and very grateful today for Dr. Jeffrey Gladden to join us at our Harmonic Alignment Podcast. I've been following your podcast and listening to your podcast for a while, and we met in person in a conference, the Energy Conference.
Nice to see you again.
You were trained as a traditional cardiologist, and now you are expert in longevity. So I always ask story behind that, how you become a longevity expert and transition from cardiology.
It's a good question. I practiced interventional cardiology here in Texas for 25 years, and I love that work. You know, I ended up building my own heart group. I had 10 offices. I co-founded a heart hospital here. I was involved with medical device companies, got involved with outlying hospitals, building cardiology programs and cath labs and things like that. So I had a lot of things going on, and I really enjoyed the whole space. But what happened to me was I got sick. I was putting on weight. I was tired all the time. I was losing muscle mass and strength. And I would come under stressful situations and get really depressed. Not the kind of depression where it's like, oh, I'll go for a walk or talk to a friend and feel better. It was like, oh my gosh, I just want out of here kind of depression. And I was developing brain fog. So I was quite concerned about this. And I was in my early 50s, and I went into one of my colleagues and got tested. And so they ran, a battery of tests for me. And what they told me when I came for the results was that, hey, all your tests look normal for your quote unquote age. You're just getting older. Why don't you take an antidepressant? And that was such an existential moment for me, right? Because I've always been extremely active. I was an athlete in high school and college, and mountain biker, snowboarder, runner, surfer, body surfer. I love being outdoors. And I couldn't believe that it was all going to be downhill from here. Right. I couldn't make peace with that. Like, it's just going to all be downhill from here. I've really reached the peak. So I rejected their advice. I didn't start an antidepressant. I instead threw myself into the functional integrative age management medicine space, and went out and got some certifications and attended a lot of conferences and did a lot of reading. And after 2.5 years, I'd basically figured out all the different problems that I had. I'd solved all the problems. I had subclinical hypothyroidism that's not adequately detected with blood work, only with biometric testing, which my reflexes were very slow. Now we do resting metabolic rates to look at thyroid that way. It complements the blood work. And genetically, I was not converting inactive thyroid to active thyroid in my brain efficiently, which you would never know unless you do genetic testing. And so I needed a special formulation of active thyroid T3 and inactive thyroid T4. And typically only the inactive thyroid is prescribed. So I was on T3 and T4, and all of a sudden the lights came back on for me. I was like, oh my gosh, I can wake up again, feel energetic. The loss of muscle mass and putting on weight was, a common problem for men as they go through andropause. Women go through menopause, men go through andropause. So I was getting low on testosterone, DHEA, some of the sex hormones. And so once I got repleted with testosterone and DHEA and things and did that in a very safe manner, a lot of it's done in a not so safe manner where people are just given testosterone and maybe a estrogen blocker and they check their levels and that's all that's done. You really have to do a lot more than that to be safe. Once I got that done in a safe manner, I lost 20 pounds of weight. I put on 20 pounds of fat. I put on 10 pounds of muscle. And so I felt great again. I weighed about what I did in college, right? And so then with the anxiety and depression and brain fog, it turns out I don't make certain neurotransmitters very well genetically. And so I needed to be on the right combination of supplements and not just, methylfolate. It had to be a whole combination of things to actually get that right. And once I was able to tease that apart, all of a sudden it was like, wow, okay, I feel really good again. So at that point, that was 2.5 years later, I decided that I could no longer practice cardiology, that I was done with that. I'd done it for a long time. I didn't want to have those conversations anymore. I wanted to focus on health optimization. And so I left cardiology in 2012. And obviously I knew how to make a good living as an interventional cardiologist, but I had no idea how to make a living doing this, but I just knew that I had to do it. I knew that I was drawn to do it and I wanted to do it. So I just kind of base jumped out of it and worked without a paycheck for about 4.5 years until I figured out how to make it work financially, and also started to realize that there was a lot more to health optimization. There was a lot of longevity things coming online and more data was being published and things like that. So I just have been eternally curious and I kept throwing myself into discovering what was out there and trying things. I'm a big experimenter, right? So I'm going to try everything that comes around the corner. I'm very open-minded, very curious and willing to try things. And so from that, I started to learn a lot more than even people in the field would know, simply because they knew about stuff, but they'd never tried it or never used it or never had clients try it, right? And so after almost 13 years now, you learn a lot. And I think it's been such a rewarding practice. Like my life is so much better, quite honestly. I would never go back. In fact, there was a cardiologist in my office this morning who wants to leave cardiology. And he was like, well, let me talk to you because I heard you made this transition. I was like, oh, sure. Let me tell you how I did it. He's like, man, I don't want to do that. I don't want to go through, all the years it took you to figure this out. He will leave and he may come to work with us even, but it's hard to walk away from something that you know and that you're comfortable with and give all that up. I will tell you that it takes courage to do that. And I think one of the number one things for anybody on this journey, whether you're a physician or non-physician who's ever listening to this, is that it takes courage to step away from what's the accepted, kind of norm, if you will. So yeah, it's been a great process though.
And changes are hard. So unless it's affect your health or life, people don't change because it's hard. Change your habits and change the way you practice and live. But if it's affecting you the way that you need to do something about it, that's only way people try to change, unfortunately.
I think there's a real element of that. It's on two fronts. It kind of gets reinforced by what we're familiar with, to your point, what's habitual to us. And it gets reinforced by everybody around us. Everybody tells you, well, you're just getting older. Now you're at this age, you shouldn't do that, or you should do this, or you should retire, or you should whatever. You're reinforced by your friends, by your family, or you're told this since you were a kid, you heard it from your grandparents, your company is telling this, your government's telling you this. It's like, how can it possibly be anything other than this, right? Everybody's saying it. And yet, what I've come to discover is that everything's made up and you can write your own story. So I've just chosen to write a completely different story. Yeah.
And curious, what age you were when they told you that you're aging and you need antidepressant?
Yeah, I was about 52, 53, somewhere in there. I was born in 1954. I'll have another birthday in February. So the audience can do the math on that, but I wake up 27 every day. And I will tell you that claiming to be a younger age and referencing your health and performance off of that younger age is such a powerful tool. Like if I were to say, yeah, but I'm so much better than most people my age, or, I'm good for my age, or any of that kind of stuff. I never, ever, 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 ever say that, because in doing that, it's an acquiescence to the aging process. You're saying, okay, well, this is normal, but I'm still good for my age, right? So I say, no, I'm not that. I'm 27. And then if I don't feel 27 or something isn't 27, I work very hard to get back to where I feel 27. I can do whatever I want. And that's where I am today. I can literally do anything I want. And that's how I want to live life. So that's kind of how I think about it.
Even in medicine, I remember when I was 35 and tried to get pregnant, I couldn't get pregnant. Of course, they blame on age. Oh, you're already aging at 35.
Right? Yeah.
Yes.
Right. Yeah, that's almost the average age for people getting pregnant, it seems like. I think there's another element here, too, for your audience to understand, and that is that, number one, it takes courage. Number two, it takes curiosity. Number three, it takes asking a different set of questions. But it's very important to have a target in mind, right? Like, what is longevity? I mean, most people think, well, longevity is you live a long time, but you're getting older while you're living a long time, right? So every picture you see of somebody 100 or 110, 120, it's like, yeah, well, they lived a long time. But when I look at those pictures, I say to myself, gosh, that's not really what I'm going for. I don't want to look like that. I don't want to be like that, right? And so I have a different definition of longevity. It's really, for us, the target is at age 100, it's a 30-year-old body and a 300-year-old mind. That's really what we're going for. So
before we go to longevity, I want to define aging and what's the hallmarks of aging.
There are many misconceptions around aging. The first one is that we perceive it as being linear, right? Like every year it's another birthday. I don't feel that much different, right? So we think we're kind of playing a linear game. And yet, when we look around us, we know that people age much more between 70 and 80, 80 and 90 than they do between 30 and 40 and 40 and 50. And yet, even though we know that, we don't relate to the game that we're in as an exponential game. We sort of mollify ourselves and say, yeah, but I'm pretty good for whatever age I am, right? 55, 60, whatever it is, 42. I'm good for my age. And so there's this misconception that we're in a linear game when it's actually an exponential game. And the reason that's so important is because if we do decide to tackle aging, we develop a linear strategy. Like, I'm going to eat better, I'm going to exercise, I'm going to sleep better, I'm going to decrease my stress, I'm going to learn how to meditate, I'm going to heal my gut, I'm going to get my hormones optimized. All wonderful, all necessary, all important components. But ultimately, everybody that ever did that still got old and died. Right? It's ultimately a linear response to an exponential problem. So you brought up, well, what is underlying the aging process, right? And so are these processes out there that have been referred to as the hallmarks of aging. There were 9 of them that were published in 2013. 5 more were published in 2022. There was a 6th one added in June of 2023. And essentially, these are metabolic processes that occur inside of cells that disrupt the ability of the cell to work properly. The interesting thing is that these hallmarks of aging are both phenotypic expressions, which means they're expressions of aging, if you will, but they're also drivers of aging, and they work together. The way to think about that is, let's say your telomeres are getting shorter. The telomeres are the end caps on the chromosome, right? When they get short enough, the cells become senescent. In other words, they turn into zombie cells. They don't work properly. They become secretory. They send out all these inflammatory cytokines that continue the aging process. But even prior to that, short telomeres decrease mitochondrial function. The mitochondria are critical for making ATP and energy, and also they have other sophisticated functions in terms of detecting threats coming into the cell and infectious diseases coming into the cell and all these other things, right? So they're super critical for our health. So telomeres get short, mitochondrial function goes down, less DNA can be repaired, right? Because there's not enough ATP. So these things interplay with each other. And as they start to cycle, it's almost like a tornado spinning up. Exponential decline occurs because they're reinforcing each other at an ever and ever faster rate. And so these hallmarks of aging play together in a way that ultimately accelerates it. So if you're going to have a strategy, you have to have a strategy that addresses the hallmarks of aging, not just the phenotypic expressions of aging, like I have a wrinkle or my hormones are down or that sort of thing. Now, All those things are super important. And it turns out that optimizing your hormones, and particularly your estrogen levels, actually does play into your aging process, right? So that's wonderful, but it's not enough. You have to have strategies around all of these different areas. And in addition to that, you have to have a bigger strategy about life itself, right? So when you're going to make 100 the new 30 and you're going to have a mind of a 300-year-old, well, that's a real psychospiritual question, right? How do you get to that? How do you have all that wisdom, equanimity, peace, tranquility, transcendence, right? How do you get to that place? Well, that's a whole process too. So that's a life energy circle. Then there's the longevity circle, which is all the hallmarks, then all the health related issues, right? Which have to be solved for. And then all the performance issues. Like when I'm 100, I want to be fast, agile, strong, quick, balanced, great cardiovascular capacity, reserve, recovery, and great flexibility. Well, if I'm going to do that at 100, I better do it today, right? And so you have to train to do that. So if you're listening to this and you're not those things today, well, you're definitely not going to be it at 100, right? And you're not going to be it 10 years from now. And so you need to start training for that kind of thing today. And so all these things kind of factor in. They all become really, really important. I will also say this, that about our perception of aging being linear, if we ask ourselves, if you're listening to this and you ask yourself, what am I going to be like 10 years from now? What am I going to be like 15 years from now? What am I going to actually be like? It is literally, I think, almost impossible to have any sense that you're going to be any different than you are right now. See what I mean? We're in an exponential game. We can't relate to it. We don't even know it's happening. We can't even project ourselves as that's even going to happen to us. And so we develop all these linear strategies that are inadequate. And lo and behold, we end up getting cancer and dying or having a stroke or whatever happens, right? So this is, I think, how you need to think about longevity. So
how we do it, how we become 30 years old when we're 100. And
yeah.
Instead also I mentioned, and I say all the time, like you use it or you lose it. So if you don't use your muscles, your brain now, you're going to lose it. So you better start doing the earlier the possible, right?
That's right. I will say this when it comes to fitness and even life itself. One of the things that I've discovered is that all of life comes down to one thing, and that's basically optimizing the nervous system, right? How we think, how we feel, what we respond to, what we believe about ourselves, what we believe about others, what we think is possible, what we think is true, what we think is impossible, how we move through space, how coordinated we are, how flexible we are, how strong we are. All of that comes down to the nervous system. And so when you actually understand that, it's like, oh, well, I just have one thing to focus on, right? I need to focus on my nervous system, because if you focus on the nervous system, you'll find yourself asking the right questions, and the questions always lead to progress. So it's like, our questions are, how good can we be, right? How do we make 100 the new 30? How do we live well beyond 120, past the Hayflick limit of telomere shortening? And how do we live young for a lifetime? Not just survive to 120. How do we live young? And so you only in life get the answers to the questions that you're asking. So if you're listening to this, ask yourself, what questions am I asking, right? Is it, where am I going to retire and how do I play more golf? Or is it, how do I actually live young for a lifetime? How do I regain my youth? You'll only get the answers to the questions you're asking. So ask the right questions. Yeah.
So what questions would you ask yourself?
Those four right there. Those four guide our practice every day. We have literally thousands of answers here at Gladden Longevity. I mean, we do all kinds of amazing cutting edge things, ridiculous things, all kinds of rejuvenation, stem cells, exosomes, and complicated procedures, plasmapheresis, all kinds of things that we've learned, peptides, things that weave together where you can do miraculous things for people. And yet we're not married to a single technology, right? Most practices have a series of things they do, and you come to them, it's like, oh, well, we'll do this for you and we'll do that for you. The way we think is, let's understand you deeply. Let's understand you more deeply than you've ever been understood, right? Both psychospiritually, emotionally, both with regards to the aging process, and we're all a mosaic of many ages, right? Many biological ages. Where are you in that sphere? What's your health like? And then what's your performance like? And things like that. And once you deeply understand somebody, then you can come forward and say, oh, okay, here are the cards you're holding. Here's your genetics. Here's how you're going to play the hand. Here's where you are in the game. Here's the things that you need to focus on now. And this is how we'll go forward. That becomes an exponential strategy when you do that, especially when there are feedback loops on follow-up testing, right? So that's an exponential strategy, and that's what we do.
And it's individual to each person, correct? Because genes are different for each person. And
100%. That's the problem with the internet is, oh, I just read that everybody should be on NAD. So it's like, oh, well, let's go get an NAD. Well, we measure NAD, right? Some people need it, some people don't. Or everybody needs this, or everybody needs that. Well, in actual fact, that's never true. When you actually deconstruct it, you can find out what somebody truly needs and then, get them what they need. Yeah.
Speaking about your book, which called 100 is the New 30, so it's intriguing title. Can you share the inspiration behind that?
I wrote the book, 100 is the New 30. It's also on Audible, it's on Amazon. And the subtitle is How Playing the Symphony of Longevity Will Enable Us to Live Young for a Lifetime. And there's a symphonic element to all of this in the sense that just because via testing or evaluation you identify that there's something that needs to be focused on, just because you find that doesn't mean you focus on it all the time. There's actually a timing and a sequence, a frequency and intensity and duration with which it's played, right? And so that's very symphonic. I'm a guitar player. I've been playing since I was 10. And so for me, it was very musical. The body is an economy of balance. It's not about, well, I want to put on as much muscle as I can, or I want to, have the highest testosterone I can, or I want to be keto all the time, right? The body doesn't like to be pushed into a corner. It likes to cycle through different things. Now we're fed, now we're fasted, now we're rested, now we're stressed, now we're cold, now we're hot, now we're all these things. Your body loves all that variety. And so it's really an economy of balance. So very, very important that you understand that and orchestrate yourself that way. So the symphony is basically finding out, where somebody is and then playing that symphony with them, particularly around the hallmarks of aging.
So it's like a holistic approach to longevity, I would say, right?
That's
so
right.
When people come to your clinic, what's the process like?
That's a good question. So people work with us from all over. They fly in from all over, quite honestly, to work with us. And the reason they do is because we have such a thorough process. And so when people come in, they'll typically spend 2 or 3 days with us. I'm getting lots of testing done. So again, we can really understand them deeply. And for the first time, they feel like they're actually understood. It's profound for them. It's very profound. We love it. And then from there, we actually start making recommendations. And sometimes while they're here, we'll actually start doing some things for them because we get some test results back, for quite quickly. Other test results will take some weeks to get back because we're sending samples around the world to get things tested. And then they come back and they'll spend another day or 2 with us to kind of go through all the results and then to start to map out the strategies. And then we have Zoom calls with them. They talk with our nutritionists. They talk with our fitness people. They talk with our life energy people around the psychospiritual space. It's a very comprehensive, to your point, holistic program to really help somebody develop a 30-year-old body and a 300-year-old mind.
And so how do you track a progress of those people?
Testing. Repeat testing.
Biomarkers.
Biomarkers and testing. That's right. And then they'll tell us also, how they're feeling. I was on a call with a gentleman today who's been with us for about 5 or 6 years out of Austin, Texas. And he was just listening to one of our podcasts, the Gladden Longevity Podcast. He was listening to one of those episodes and he said, I just had a breakthrough listening to that in terms of my own perspective on life. And I was like, great, tell me more about that. I'd like to hear about that. So he explained to me how he used to be a very happy guy who was always felt so grateful for all of life. And then he got to a point in his life where he was kind of afraid that the shoe was going to drop, right? Something was going to go wrong. And then he got into a phase of his life where some things did go wrong. He had some family stress, he had some health challenges, some things like that. And we've helped him navigate quite a bit of things. Of course, he's made amazing progress. But he's now gotten back to a point of reclaiming this idea of, I'm so grateful. He was telling us, I feel so great. I literally feel like I could do anything. He's in his early 70s. I can literally do anything. And I said, that's fantastic. And he said, but even beyond that, the physical capability, it's the fact that I feel so much gratitude and peace in terms of who I am. And I was like, that's fantastic. He's going through life with much less stress, right? Because he's not worried about things he can't control. This is how we actually elevate ourselves.
And the clients that you have, they come to you with some chronic complicated conditions, or they just want to have the best rest of their life, like for performance and longevity?
Good question. So virtually everybody that comes to us has an aspiration, right? Because they want to be youthful for a long time. They resonate with the questions that we're asking, right? How good can I be? How do I make 100 the new 30? How do I live well beyond 120? How do I live young for a lifetime? They're resonating with those questions. So they come to us with that. But everybody that comes to us also has something going on. I don't know if I've ever had anybody come in here that doesn't have something else going on, whether it's insulin resistance or psoriasis or sexual dysfunction or psychological trauma or something's going on that's, not as good as it could be for them. We're systematically want to understand all that and help them with it. Yeah.
And I think when people have complicated, serious conditions, they don't think about living on to the 100 because
That's right.
they survive now at their age 50 or 60.
That's a good point.
So that it's not even their mind to ask those questions. Like, how do I
That's
survive
right.
today or tomorrow?
So to your point, I just got off a phone call about an hour ago with a young woman in her 30s who's suffering with very severe psoriasis for the last 2 years. She uses a steroid cream just so she can go to work, but she doesn't like having to use it so much. She's struggling with some body composition issues and some PCOS and some diabetes and some things like this. So she is coming in asking the questions, how do I fix this, right? And again, as you know, it's a bigger question than I have psoriasis, right? There's a lot that goes into a dysregulated immune system, right? So what is her gut like? What are her food sensitivities like? What are her hormones like? What toxins are in her body? What are genetically, how does she detox? How does she do lots of other things, right? She also has some root canals, which can be a problem, of course. So, when you start to uncover all the things, she saw a dermatologist that gave her a steroid cream, right? Right. So the difference is us deconstructing to really understand what's going on. And she'll come in and spend 2 or 3 days with us, and we'll do some therapies for her while she's here. We can calm down her psoriasis for sure. But we're actually, as importantly, going to understand what's driving this in the first place, and then basically fix those things so she can live a life without having to be on steroid creams. That's the whole idea. Yeah.
And you need to re-educate clients because they always looking for one pill or one thing that they can do, but you never get under the hood of the problem.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, it's not as easy as it looks. And yet when people hear about the approach, it just resonates with them. Of course, it's more complicated than that, right? I mean, the human body is very complicated, and we are very complicated psychospiritual beings as well, right? So there's a lot going on there. It takes a methodical, systematic, loving, caring approach to actually help people unravel those knots and figure out what's going on and then put it back together.
Speaking of human performance, in your opinion, what's the next big frontier in human performance or regenerative medicine?
I think, quite honestly, it's training the nervous system. I think many people are focused on putting on muscle, right? There's a lot of talk out there about putting on muscle. There's a lot of talk about low-level cardio, like level 2 cardiovascular training, right? We measure VO2 maxes, anaerobic thresholds, pulmonary function tests on everybody that comes to the clinic, essentially. And what we find is that I've been doing this kind of testing for over 20 years. I started back when I was doing cardiology. We understand what it takes to build VO2, and we know that VO2 is one of the most critical predictors of longevity, decreased cancer, dementia, heart disease, everything else. So we know how to help people build VO2, and it's not level 2 training. That's not how you get there. You don't get there by walking, right? You also don't get there by interval training. People say, well, I've got a trainer. I'm doing Orange Theory. I'm getting plenty of cardio. It's like, great, let's test you. Their VO2s are all low. The way that you build VO2 is basically by doing more protracted cardio, say for the average person, level 3 cardio, and then do that 3 days a week, and twice a week do some interval training where you get up to level 5. That builds cardio. And when people do that, they systematically build their VO2 maxes, right? We've seen this over and over and over and over and over again, right? So there is a place for zone 2 training in elite athletes that are overtraining and they need to just slow down just to kind of allow the system to settle. There's a real place for it there, and they can actually get better. But for the average person, zone 2 is not going to get it done. So there's that piece. And then the other thing is people want to put on muscle. Well, it turns out, as I mentioned earlier, all of life comes down to one thing, which is training the nervous system. So really, when you go into the gym, and I will say this also, you can never really get in shape in a gym. And I'll tell you why. The reason is it's not enough challenge for your nervous system. You know, when you're outside and the trail is up and down and the wind is blowing and the trees are rustling and something just jumped over there, your nervous system is now fully engaged. And that's how you get in shape. Now you're breathing clean air, your eyes are working, your ears are working. This is how you get in shape, because you want to actually not only get the cardio, not only get the strength, but you want to get your nervous system fully engaged, balance, flexibility, proprioception, right? A sense of where you are in space. All these things have to be trained. Otherwise, you have very strong people that still trip and fall down, right? They still feel for the step, right? You want to be able to run down the stairs, right? You're not going to be able to run down the stairs training in the gym. You've got to be outside doing things that enable your nervous system to have that kind of capacity, right? So we work in the gym. I do things in the gym, but I do it in service of being able to be outside where I can really stretch myself. So
Well, alternate, right? Today you're outside and tomorrow you're in the gym. So when you do a lot of different things,
that's right.
more resilience and more capacity for the body.
That's right. That's right. Your body loves variety. It loves variety in the foods that you eat and in the exercises that you do. You don't want to be doing the same thing. Every time you go to the gym, it shouldn't be the same routine. Mix it up. And a lot of balance training. We're big on balance training, balanced boards and walking in figure eights with our eyes closed, backwards, forwards, things like this. All of a sudden you start to feel like, I could run down the stairs. It's not a problem. If I want to go dancing, it's like, I feel so unbelievably fluid in my movements here, right? I mean, this is fun, right? So when you're training your nervous system, it actually is so fun. You have so much more fun in life. Yeah.
And also you have all senses engaged when you're outside, and also connect to nature, to the earth energy, go hug the tree. That's my favorite activity.
Right. Sunshine and the green and everything that feeds your system. Your nervous system loves that. It loves to feel the sun and feel the wind. Yeah.
So one thing you already start talking about, like myth about the aging, like gym is not going to do it. What other myth that you want to debunk about the longevity or aging?
People don't put enough focus on the psychospiritual element of it. I have a circle of topics that we talk with our clients about called the life energy circle, right? And it's not because we're religious in any particular way, but it's based on the first thing, which is a growth mindset, right? So in that growth mindset, it's about being married to your questions and not your current answers. And I find that all progress comes from questions, not from answers. So you see this in professionals all the time. They get trained in a particular way, certainly in medical profession and other professions as well. They get trained, they've gone to good schools, they're good students, they got good grades, everything is great, and they've been trained. And now they get married to a way of thinking. They get married to a set of answers. I went to Harvard, I went to wherever I went, and now this is how we should do it. So they get married to that, right? And once you get married to a set of answers, then when somebody disagrees with it, you get defensive, right? You've got to defend your answer now. It really crushes your curiosity. If you understand that all answers have a shelf life. Certainly what I learned in medical school, I graduated in 82, but what I learned in medical school, some of it still applies, but a lot of it doesn't. So if I'd been married to those answers, well, where would I be? So you have to continue to be curious. And so this is the defining of the questions that you want, so critical. And I think the other thing that's important is making a distinction between what I call binary thinking and quantum thinking. So in binary thinking, if you look around the world today, many conflicts, right? And I think all the conflicts are a function of binary thinking. Somebody's right and somebody else is wrong, right? And from the other vantage point, well, we're right and you're wrong, right? So it's this binary thinking. And yet in quantum thinking, kind of like a quantum computer, binary, it's zeros and ones. Here it's a +1, -1, 0 in a sphere of all possibilities. And in quantum thinking, you can actually come to the best solution for everybody involved at this point in time, right? And that's a different way of thinking. But people get married to their answers, then they turn into binary thinkers, and it leads to all this conflict. So I think switching up to being a curious person that's asking questions, I think that's the way forward, and becoming a quantum thinker, if you will. That's one of the first things to focus on.
And you also mentioned that emotions also are part of the longevity. Talk a little bit more about it. What emotions are distracting or beneficial?
I think there are many beneficial emotions, right? Transcendence, love, acceptance, peace. Those are wonderful emotions to cultivate. And yet, a lot of us have gone around with anxiety, with depression, with PTSD. And what I've come to understand about mental health in general is that all of us have suffered trauma. I've never talked to anybody that has not suffered trauma on some level. Some more graphic than others, but nonetheless, everybody has suffered trauma. Everybody listening, raise your hand if you haven't had some trauma, but I suspect nobody has their hand up. And so we've all suffered trauma. So what happens to us as humans is we start living in reaction to those traumas. And that means that we're kind of encumbered or we're kind of handcuffed to those traumas. So when you think about healing, it really revolves around deeply understanding those traumas. What actually happened? Who said what? Where was I? Who were they? What did I contribute to it? What did they contribute to it? And you get to a point where you can understand it deeply enough to where you can actually forgive everybody that's involved, including yourself, right? So that's the first step, being able to forgive everyone. And then when you get to that point, you get to a point where you start to actually transcend the trauma. And what happens there is that you actually become grateful for everything that ever happened because it has made you wiser. It has made you more resilient. It has made you have more empathy, more compassion for more people. And so all of a sudden you transcend this into being grateful for all these traumas because they actually ultimately enhance your life. So then you've made peace with the past, so to speak. You don't carry all of that trauma and living in reaction to that trauma. So I call that becoming unencumbered, right? And I think part of having a 300-year-old mind is to become unencumbered from the traumas that we're living in reaction to.
So when people start looking at longevity, what age they should start preventing their aging process?
I mean, I think we should start talking to the fetuses when they're about 10 months old and getting them to start thinking about longevity, right? Aging typically starts the moment we're born, if not before, right? And yet there's growth and development and aging happening simultaneously. As you know, we lose resilience, we lose the ability to regenerate, right? Like if you're in the womb and you get your finger cut off, you can regrow another finger at certain points in the developmental process, right? But we lose that ability. When you talk about young plasma and the benefits of young plasma, which can be beneficial, they won't accept young plasma from anybody over age 25, right? You have to be under 25. So basically, you can characterize it as that youth is over by about age 25, 26. And now from there, you're aging. And there's actually a big spike in aging in the late 20s and into the early 30s. Actually, a pretty big, steep spike. And aging is not a linear process, right? So it goes up and down. If somebody gets pregnant, they age faster. And then when they have the child, they can recover age. Also, they can regain that aging. And if you get COVID, you age faster. And then if you can overcome that, then you can reclaim age. So we're going in fits and spurts with aging, right? And then there's a massive increase in aging between age 63 and 78. Massive, right? And so I think it's so important for people to think about it starting in their 20s, right? And what I find is that people in their late 20s are becoming much more focused on longevity than they were 20 years ago, because it's come into the vernacular, it's come into common society, and they're starting to see their parents, and some of their parents are actually being very proactive about their health and longevity, and they're seeing that versus their other friends. But really, we have clients that come to us in their 30s, right? Because they're starting to think about this. And you can find people in their 30s that are going on 50, right? Or 55, and you can find people in their 30s that are going on 18. And that's not only in a headspace, that's also biologically, right? I think it's starting sooner and sooner, and I don't think it's ever too early to start thinking about it. Yeah.
Is it ever too late?
Yes, it can be too late. You can get to a point where there's so many horses out of the barn that you're just not going to get them back, at least not with any of the technologies we currently have. When I was doing interventional cardiology, I developed an understanding just from seeing people. We did a lot of stent work and heart caths and pacemakers and things like that, but then we would also have people get bypass surgery and things. What we learned is that great technique, right, great skill on the part of the doctor can never make up for poor protoplasm, meaning that the patient's tissue just won't sew together, it just won't heal. So you can get to a point where it's too late. You can get to that point.
And it can be in 50 or can be in 80s.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, depending on how much you've abused yourself or or if you have a genetic predisposition for accelerated aging of some sort. So, yeah.
Speaking of genes, can you do anything about the genes, like with epigenetics, or can you still live longer, healthier?
Oh, absolutely. When we first started doing genetics, I started doing it back in the early 2000s. One of the labs came out with some genes related to cardiovascular health. And I was so excited. I'm like, oh, wow, let's take a look at this. And one of the things that I noticed was that if we got people to act in terms of what we saw genetically, they would do better, right? They wouldn't come back for another stent. And I was super excited about this. I couldn't get my colleagues interested, but I was very excited about it. And that's really kind of blossomed into realizing that genes are not your destiny, right? And longevity itself is probably only about 15% genetic. A lot of it has to do with lifestyle and these hallmarks of aging. But with genes in general, it is possible to either upregulate a gene, in other words, make it work better or more powerfully, or downregulate a gene, in other words, keep it from working as powerfully as you want it to. It's really possible to do that with different supplements, different lifestyle choices. So we're modifying genetic expression all the time. And that's really fun to do. But it's very individualized, right? Not everybody needs the same thing.
Personalized and precision medicine, I think.
That's right. That's right.
And I'm very excited about genetics. I just had presentation yesterday to my practitioners about that. And I just did my 14 years old daughter genetic testing. And the earlier you know specifically about your kids, the more you can do for them.
That's right. Yeah, we like a company called Intellex DNA. They're located out of Austin, Texas. They're doing a phenomenal job of reporting. So a lot of places can sequence your genome, but it's not so much the sequencing. That's easy these days. It's all about the reporting, right? And what's the actionable information here? And they do a really spectacular job of helping with that. We use many different gene companies because we're asking different questions, but for just general genetics, they do a wonderful job.
Good to know. Our podcast name is Harmonic Alignment. What does it mean for you, that word, harmonic alignment?
Well, everything is energy, right? Everything is vibration. I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of 0-point energy. Have you heard about this?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So with 0-point energy, it's basically when things are cooled down to absolute zero in the quantum field, there's still activity going on. And in the quantum energy field, particles are actually coming into existence, right? So energy is creating matter, and then that matter can go back out of existence, right? And the energy that's associated with formation of matter and the dissolution of matter is called 0-point energy. It's the energy that's still in the quantum, even at absolute zero, where technically all mechanical activity is stopped, right? And so when you think about 0-point energy, it's pretty interesting because it's going to be a way for us to actually fuel for free all the energy needs on the planet. In fact, they talk about the amount of 0-point energy in a glass of water is enough to actually power the entire planet. They're talking about using it for interstellar travel and things like this. So when you talk about harmonic alignment, I think about being energetically, part of my 300-year-old mind is energetically and harmonically in harmonics, right? Harmonics are basically octave changes of a note, right? So harmonics are vibrations that occur the same note, if you will, at different points on the scale. So harmonic alignment means that your vibrational energies are actually all aligned and synchronized. And when that's true, and that's a psychospiritual question, a biological question, biochemical question, nervous system question, when you get all that aligned, all of a sudden, it's a completely different world. You no longer inhabit Earth the same way that you inhabited Earth, right? It's a beautiful construct. I'm not sure where you came up with it, but that's how I think about it.
Thank you for that explanation. When you explain it, like you in a bliss point or like flow state.
Right. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, like a flow state. A flow state, it would be a harmonic alignment. That's right.
Anything else that you would like to share with our listeners?
If they'd like to look at the book, 100 is the New 30, it's available on Amazon. It's on Audible. Our podcast is the Gladden Longevity Podcast. We have over 250 episodes there. We're just releasing on a Doctor Talks on exponential longevity. It's a series of talks that we did. I did over 33 interviews for that, along with some other people. So exponential longevity is out there. And then if anybody would like to contact us, they can reach us through the gladdenlongevity.com website, and we'll be happy to touch base and see if they might be a good fit. We might be a good fit for them.
And I already signed up for the summit that you're doing.
Yeah, we're also coming out with a Gladden Longevity certification course for practitioners. We'll be announcing that fairly soon.
Thank you, Dr. Gladden. Thank you for amazing information and for your wisdom.
Such a pleasure. Great to see you again. And thanks so much for the interview.
Are you ready for your Energy for Life bioenergetic nest scan? Dr. Larisa Sharapova and myself, Priscilla Koblenz, offer personal, private, 90-minute consults to get you back to optimal health and well-being. And starting in the new year, we're offering an Energy Mastery Program, a monthly membership, which will give you access to a monthly scan as well as 2 group masterclasses to help you optimize your wellness in the new year. For more details, visit the show notes or check out harmonicalignment.co. We hope you enjoyed today's episode of Harmonic Alignment. If something resonated with you, we would love to hear about it. Please consider leaving us a 5-star review and subscribing so you don't miss an upcoming episode. Thank you. The information contained in this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and not intended for the purpose of diagnosing, treating, curing, or preventing any disease. Before using any products referenced on the podcast, consult with your healthcare provider. Carefully read all labels and directions. The products and information received through the podcast should not be used to replace a consultation or advice from your healthcare provider. If you suspect you have a medical problem or have any healthcare questions, please promptly call your healthcare provider. This podcast, including Dr. Larisa Sharapova and Priscilla Koblenz and the producers, are not responsible for any possible adverse effects from the use of information contained in this podcast. This podcast may contain endorsements and advertisements for products or services. Individuals on this podcast may have a direct financial benefit to the product or services referenced.